The Sims franchise is probably one of the most well-known video games to exist. It appeals to a variety of gamers, new or old. For me personally, I've played mostly the newer games, Sims 3 and 4, but I went back to play 2, which I found just as enjoyable. One of the best things about the games are the humor and the storylines. When people think about Sims, there are some characters that stand out and have reappeared in each Sims entry. Today I will be drawing one of those iconic characters, Goth. The Goth family has been in the game since the very first Sims game, with each game adding a new family member or going back in time to some older generations of the family, like in The Sims 3. The titular Goth member would have to be Bella. She has been in every game and has remained design-wise unchanged in every iteration. Her iconic red dress and dark hair and features definitely stand out and give her kind of a mysterious quality. I thought she would make an appropriate first drawing challenge, as I hope to make this a small series. I kept her look here for the sketch and gave her a sultry sort of come hither look. When I was doing research on her design, although her dress doesn't really change at all, her facial features and hair do vary a little bit, as the graphics and style of each sim game are quite different. I did exclude The Sims 3 since she's a child in that game, unless you actively play that family and age her up. I borrowed the most looks-wise from Sims 2, as I think that's the game where she actually gets the most personality and has a whole storyline built around her. Sims 4, I also enjoy her look, so I blended those two for inspiration and then kind of did my own theme for the rest. I kept the style more realistic and painterly, as I think for this series I want to make the art more realistic. I may pepper in some more cartoony drawings on the side just to keep it fun, but I think it's more interesting if I push my style and challenge myself. And that way you get to see more of my process when it comes to painterly stuff, as I feel like the cartoony stuff where it's fun to see is not as explanatory. I feel like it doesn't lend itself to teaching as well. I guess I could put it that way. If you've seen my other videos, I do not really have a consistent style. I love to draw more simple, kind of cartoony styled stuff, and I really also like to do realistic styles as well. If you have any opinions on what you prefer to see on my channel, I'd love to hear it, as I'm pretty new channel and I'm still trying to find my footing and figure out this YouTube thing and where I want to take my art and how to stand out against the other art channels. For the drawing, I also wanted to implement plumb bobs. So besides the one I gave her to hold, I also did 2 little headshots next to her showing different emotions and the plumb bobs that would go with them. Plumb bobs change based on the needs of your sim. So a well taken care of sim will have a green one, a worn down sim will have a yellow one, and finally a sim on the verge of death will be red, or at least on the verge of passing out in a puddle of their own pee. If you know what I mean, you know. I just want to quickly talk about how I was having the absolute worst art day on the second headshot I drew. You will see that soon. I spent 2 hours drawing heads with a variety of different upset or sad emotions, getting to almost complete rendering in each one before I just completely scrapped them. I would pull out references, and yet nothing looked right to me. I just chalked it up to a bad art day, closed my iPad, and just stopped drawing. Sometimes there will be days where you can't even draw a stickman right. The next day, I opened my iPad, and the first headshot I did, I actually liked it. So yeah, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you hate everything you've been drawing, take a break and accept that you can't have a good art day every day, no matter your skill level. One of the failed headshots I did end up keeping because it really wasn't that awful. I just found it didn't really resemble Bella that much. Sometimes the problem with references, if you're drawing different faces of the same face, you can miss the likeness of the original face you drew. It takes a lot of practice and skill to be able to use different references of different people to get an emotion down for one single character and have them all look like the same person. And sometimes we forget, but emotions can make us look like different people anyways. Try drawing yourself in the mirror, making different expressions if you want a better understanding of what I mean. Before I did this drawing, I had never actually played with the Goth family in The Sims. Normally, I just create my own families and play with those. I have almost never played the pre-made families they give you. The only time I have was Sims 2 and 3, and I think that's because they usually have a lot more lore or established storylines, so it made them a little more interesting. Because I feel like if I'm gonna make something up anyways, then I might as well create my own characters. The Goths have always had a lot of drama around them. I know there's like a lot of YouTube videos out there about the Goth families, especially Bella. If you know anything about Sims 2, there's a lot of weird alien lore behind all of that. And it's definitely interesting, and it's interesting to see how much the Sims team thought about the characters back then. And, you know, they weren't just characters, but they had some life to them, you know. But I think in The Sims 4, they're quite boring. I don't think there's really much lore. I do like their house, though. When I was playing with them, like, oh, they have a really nice house. I think at some point they were redone. I don't know if the house was redone, but definitely the family looks a little different because they look different than what I remember back in like 2015 Sims 4, which was a completely different game than it is now. use. I love the Jane Sketch, I think that's how you say it, brushes. I found them on Gumroad, and I think I follow the artist on Instagram. That's probably where I first found them. They have a bunch of combination packs, so they have a sketch pack, they have a paint pack. I love the sketch pack. I think the pencil in that one is really great. For me, I really like a good sketch pencil because that is probably one of the brushes I use the most. For Procreate, I didn't particularly love some of the default ones, and I found it hard to make exactly what I wanted. So I feel like those packs are pretty good for what I'm looking for, because if you aren't aware, my favorite brush to paint with is like a nice square brush with tapered opacity on the end. That is my favorite thing to do. If I needed just one brush, I would just use that one. But I find it hard sometimes to find packs with a brush like that. And usually what I do is I end up making my own, like I did in Clip Studio, and then before that Photoshop when I used Photoshop. But for Procreate, I wasn't crazy about the brush editor, so I never ended up making my own, but I found these in the pack and I love them. They're really great, and they have a few different settings depending on the pack you get, so I would highly recommend that if you're anything like me as far as the way you like to paint. For this headshot, I didn't really have a reference. I did have a reference for the mouth, just because I feel like smiles can get either too wide or too narrow, and they can start looking kind of weird, especially with the teeth. So I did use a reference for that, but everything else was just sort of off the top of my head. I think when I look back at it, it does look like the original Bella that I first did. Of course, it's a little different. It's never going to look the same, but I did the best I could, and I think it did come out pretty nice. feel like it kind of reminds me of a celebrity, but I'm not sure who. But when I look at it, I'm like, "Oh, she looks familiar in some way." But I guess that makes sense since everything we draw, even if we don't use reference, we're still referencing it from something in our memory bank, someone that we saw, and whether it's a combination of different features or just straight pulled from a person, it's always going to end up looking like someone that you know. If you're curious about my process for doing these headshots, it's very messy. It's not, I don't want to say mathematical, but there's no lines. I just literally just slap colors on and say, yeah, that looks right. I find it a very nice way to paint faces if I'm just doing studies or little thumbnails where I'm not agonizing about the anatomy too much. But I think if you can just put a lot of blobs of colors, first I like to start out with a mid-tone, and then I go in with one of the darkest shades just to show, okay, this is where I want the features. I quickly shade like big blocks for the eyes where I know the eyes are going to go inside of that, and then usually for the bottom of the nose and the mouth. And I kind of block in the planes as I go, and I render, or I try to render as I go, but not get too lost into the details, because I find if you get lost into the details too early on, that's when things can start getting wonky and much harder to fix. And psychologically, you don't want it to fix as much, or you don't want to fix it as much because you're like, well, I spent so much time on that part and it looks so good. I don't want to erase things because it doesn't line up correctly. So if you can catch all of that early on and keep the rendering to the end, even though I know that's people's favorite part, then it will look better in the long term. For the final headshot, this was the one I was having a lot of issues with. This one in particular isn't the one. This was the one that I deemed good enough to stay in the picture, but I went through about 3 or 4 headshots before I finally got to one that I think looked okay. enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more videos like this in the future. If you have any comments about what you'd like to see as well, please leave them down below. That'll definitely help me figure out what kind of content people are interested in. So thank you for watching.